Welcome to the Movie and a Show. It's presented by the Canadian Cattlemen Association and their sponsor, Great Western Brewery out of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada, proud brewers of Original 16. My name's Brad Wall, and I'm going to be your MC today. We shot this a couple weeks ago in the beautiful Cypress Hills, where they have been effectively and fervently praying for moisture, apparently, like they have in much of the prairies. This particular event presented by the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, I hope you'll find both informational and enjoyable in terms of the entertainment. Tammy and I we've moved out to the Cypress Hills. We did it, I guess it was back in May of this year, and we've met some amazing people. We've made fast and good friends. Many of them, the ranching families in the area here. And so it confirmed for us what we knew all along, and that is that this industry, our industry, is so important, obviously, to the economy. But the best part about it are its people. Those same people are environmentalists. They've been some of the most effective environmentalists ranchers have since they started ranching here in the 1870s along the prairies. The McIntyre Ranch, the McIntyre family, and those that have followed after are historically well known and presently well known to be effective stewards of the land and environmentalists. The Canadian Cattlemen's Association have been working hard to advocate for our industry, to tell an important environmental story on behalf of ranching in Canada, on behalf of the beef industry, on behalf of those who are stewards of the land. And one of the most important tools they have in that advocacy is the movie you're about to see. It is an award-winning documentary. It's won international awards, it's won domestic awards, it's been critically acclaimed, and the story it tells is very, very important to us. We hope you'll enjoy it. We hope you will share it. Crack your favorite Great Western beverage, get some popcorn, enjoy. EA has a sponsor for the show, and that is the Great Western Brewing Company out of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. They are a great brewery. They're employee-owned. They make wonderful beer. They have a number of different products. Here's a new one. This is their Ultra, 80 calories for those of you who are counting those. Low alcohol. This here is one of their signature beers, Original 16. And this right here, this is a Radler. So I'm personally not keen on Radler, but I know people that are, and they say this is the best Radler they've ever had. It's where they put fruit in beer, and I think fruit does for beer what a carbon tax does for the environment, which is not very much.
Walk down the street and ask any Canadian to name the world's most endangered ecosystem. Chances are they'll say either the rainforests or the coral reefs. These two ecological hotspots are the focus of international campaigns to protect biodiversity.
Well, the international community has been making its opinion clear.
They're the subject of social awareness campaigns through the news and social media. As you walk down grocery aisles, you'll see products with logos about protecting marine life or rainforests. And chances are your favorite restaurant has started offering paper straws. There's no denying the impact we are having on the planet. And with all this increased awareness, you may be surprised to find out that one of the most endangered ecosystems in the world is actually one we have right here in Canada.
Here in Western Canada, we have less than 20% of our native grasses left. In some areas, that number is as low as 13%, which is really sad because you think of the cultural significance that these grasslands have for Western Canada, first the Indigenous peoples, and then the settlers that came out. Everybody talked about the prairies as being a vast inland sea of grass. And honestly, if you've ever had the opportunity to spend an afternoon in a grassland when the wind is blowing and you hear it swishing, you would think that you're in a sea. But it's disappearing, and it's disappearing at a real alarming rate.
The loss of Canada's native grasslands is also a loss for the world. Humans depend on nature for our very survival, and the loss of grasslands creates major environmental issues such as flooding, loss of wildlife habitat, and a reduction in soil carbon sequestration.
in healthy native grass, there can be over 100 different plant species within a 5-acre radius. Not only are there plants, but there's a lot of different wildlife.
There's more than 80% of Canada's species at risk that depend on grasslands. By losing our grasslands, it's actually going to be extremely impactful on the majority of our endangered species.
Basically with grass, what they say is that you've got what you have above ground, you also have below ground. So if you have grass that looks like this above ground, then you also have roots that look like this below ground. But with native prairies, it's like threefold, where the roots really extend deep into the soil. The benefit of that is there's two cycles of carbon, and the above ground stuff every year in the spring, like right now, it's sucking carbon from the air and producing plant matter above ground and below. But all the stuff above ground gets cycled back into the air again usually by the end of the summer, or for sure by the next year. The stuff that goes into the ground is the roots, and that stuff's what becomes really stable and long-lasting in the soil. And that's how they build organic matter here. So this ranch is 65,000 acres, and it sequesters, currently right now, there are approximately 2 million tons of carbon, which is the equivalent to the emissions from over 100,000 Canadians for a year. So that is stable, long-term, and permanent in the ground as long as we have an intact ecosystem and cattle grazing on it.
Over the last decade, the story of cows and the environment has been a hot topic, but the narrative has been focused on cattle's contribution to climate change and the destruction of the rainforest. The idea that cattle could be integral to the health of an ecosystem is a very different story. In order to understand the real impact of cattle on a specific ecosystem, we have to look at the context.
The context is so important. We're not standing in a rainforest, we're standing on the Canadian prairie. And so in that context, we need grazers, and we need a livestock industry to keep the prairie, what's precious left of it, where it is. And so in our Canadian context, let's think about what's most sustainable for here.
So what role do cattle play in the grasslands ecosystem?
What happens is the glaciers came and wiped off all the topsoil, so we had no life. There was nothing here, and it grew topsoil down into the soil. I always thought that topsoil grew up and it was an accumulation of something, but topsoil actually grows down into the dirt, and it's just a conversion of inorganic, dead rock and silt and sand into actually this dark black life, which is like an Amazon rainforest, but underground, where you have little tiny T-Rex predators, and they're going around and killing other things, and prey animals and parasites, and it's a whole complex web underground, an ecosystem that's alive. And by having cattle here, they're creating that life. They're the keystone species in this ecosystem. It was the bison before them, and the bison completely built this into the ecosystem that we have today, and built all the topsoil and sequestered all the carbon. And when they disappeared, these grasslands became sick, and they needed to have another keystone large herbivore grazing on it.
When a keystone species is removed from a habitat, all other species are affected, and some may disappear from that ecosystem or even become extinct. Without the presence of a grazing species on the grasslands, there's a devastating impact on the natural production cycle of the grass.
In the fall, that top growth dies and the root underneath the soil stays growing. But because the top growth has died, if it's not grazed and removed, what happens in the spring is it gets harder for the new growth to grow up through it. So the grass actually ends up starting to smother itself and all of the other species around it. So really, you need to have the grazers on there that are helping to remove and eat off some of that growth so that it can start regrowing again in the spring.
Without ranchers to keep these wide open spaces intact, we wouldn't have these amazing iconic landscapes. The families that own these ranches, it's been in their family for generations. They genuinely care about the land. And there's a really direct correlation between healthy land and healthy cows. Ranchers know that if they take care of the land, it's going to benefit, the whole cattle production industry. And so there's this really symbiotic relationship between cows and native grassland.
There's no better example of this than the story of the Grasslands National Park. Parks Canada, in hopes of preserving the prairie land and saving it from being plowed and turned into cropland, had their own ideas in 1988 about what would be good for the grass, and that did not include grazing. This created friction between Parks Canada and the local ranchers, who argued that grazing and disturbance were critical to healthy native prairie. For 20 years, much of the grass lay idle, grazed only occasionally by wandering wildlife. So what happened after removing cattle from native grasslands? The grasslands lost its biodiversity, and tame species of grasses such as crested wheatgrass began to take over. This also impacted wildflowers, pollinators, and the homes of birds that nest in the native grasses. Fortunately, Parks Canada listened. They researched and worked closely with Saskatchewan ranchers, conservationists, and scientists to bring cattle back to the national park in order to benefit native birds and other species.
We need that grazing impact. So when we think about the grass that we see here, when we have a grazer come along and bite those plants and create an interesting and dynamic canopy structure in that grass, that creates homes and types of homes for all kinds of birds and all kinds of other animals, and lets light down to the soil surface to let different types of plants grow and compete, and all of those things add to the biodiversity and these bio-rich communities that we have.
There's deer and elk and grizzly bears and worms and all sorts of things in here, and if you were to cultivate this and grow lettuce, you would have to get rid of all of those other things, whereas cattle just share the ecosystem. They don't use it completely, they just share it with everything else, and that's what's really special, is that cattle are able to be a part of the ecosystem without damaging it, but actually to benefit it.
While the native prairie ecosystem is a pretty tough ecosystem, it can survive a lot. The one thing it can't survive is being broken up. When the native prairie is plowed or tilled or converted for other uses, even if it's only used under those different uses for 5 or 10 years and then seeded right back down to grass, it never comes back in this part of the world as true native prairie.
When the Canadian prairies were settled, a large portion of the native grasslands were lost to the development of cities and towns, construction of highways, and the plowing of land for growing crops and other uses. With 74% of Canada's native grasslands now lost forever, preserving what's left is critical. Working with ranchers to help manage the grasslands by using domesticated livestock to graze the land that bison roamed for thousands of years may be able to preserve this precious resource for future generations. Right now, we have a choice. But if we wait until it's gone, there won't be a choice left to make.
I heard a quote once, and it talked about the extinction of a species. And it's a very, very powerful quote, because it said, is a species extinct when there are no longer any species left on the planet? Or are they extinct when there are so few that can't hear each other calling to each other? So could you imagine that, being an animal that calls this place home, and there's so few spaces left that you can survive, that you can't hear any of your mates calling? So, the thing is being in conservation, you kind of have to be an eternal optimist, and I'm very optimistic, and I really think that these are beautiful landscapes. They provide so much to humans, and I think we've all come to a spot in our civilization where we're starting to realize that we depend on nature and we really have to live in symbiosis with it. So I really think that there's a lot of hope for these grasslands, that if enough people start to care about them, we'll never have to wonder if they go extinct or not.
So I hope you enjoyed the show. And more importantly, I hope you share it. That movie is only as powerful in terms of advocacy as our willingness to make sure people see it. So you can download it on YouTube. You can share the link on YouTube with your business network, with your trade association, with your friends, with family, and we hope you will do that. It's gaining some momentum, this particular documentary, and I think you'll agree it's an important one for Canadians, for North Americans, for people around the world to see, to understand what kind of stewards that our ranchers are, our sector is for the environment. So that brings us to the show part of the CCA's movie and a show, and for that we've got a young singer-songwriter from the prairies of Canada, from my hometown actually, from my house actually, in Swift Current, Saskatchewan. He's been working hard at his craft for, I guess, about 5 or 6 years now, touring all over North America and with his band playing his songs and some songs that others have written. He's passionate about Western culture and Western songs. You know, there's not a lot of artists out there beyond Cord Blunt and just a handful who are doing Western music and who are opening new audiences to the music, but then also the history that the songs tell and the culture that they promote. So with no further ado, on behalf of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association and their sponsor, Great Western Brewery out of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, please enjoy a few songs from Colter Wall.
Hey folks, I'd just like to thank Amy Peck, who reached out to me about helping promote this movie, this documentary. And she sort of reached out to me a while ago and said, hey, we're trying to get this thing in front of some people, and would you help promote it? And we're doing a screening, and would you maybe sing a few songs sort of on par with, you know, the theme of the movie. So I'd just like to thank her for having me be a part of it. The topic that's pretty important to me. So without any further ado, I'm gonna sing a few songs. This is one I wrote. It's about Southwest Saskatchewan. It's called Western Swing and Waltzes. It goes like this. East of beautiful Alberta, north of old Montana, the living's fine when the springtime's kind to a bovine raising man. They sort 'em and stretch 'em and tail 'em down like they did in days gone by. Good slap fence and common sense are there in short supply, where the iron still hits the fire, the rope is thrown straight and true. They scorch their hides till upon their side the brand is showing through. And the springtime turns with the coulee's curve, and it's summer once again. Whoopie-tie-I-o at the rodeo, and we pray our buddies win. It's Western swing and waltzes, like to wear out your boots, and it's horsehair floors and Louis L'Amour after they close the shoes, and they've rolled up all the rank ones, and the chucks are out of sight. It's Western swing and waltzes in Saskatchewan tonight. Western swing and waltzes, like to wear out your boots, and it's horsehair floors and Louis L'Amour After they close the shoe, they've rolled up all the rank ones, and the chucks are out of sight. It's western swing and waltzes in Saskatchewan tonight. It's western swing and waltzes in Saskatchewan tonight.
I think next I'll do a song I recorded, I guess, a little over a year ago now. This is written by a friend of mine. He's a great songwriter, great guitar picker, pretty bit of a cowboy himself. It's a song written by my buddy Mike Beck, who's from California. And this is just a little 2/4 song about Doctor and a Cow called Happy Reunion.
Out riding my horse across pasture, I jerked my catch twine down. I seen a cow with a sticker in her eye, and I bedded that old hide down. Yes, sir, I bedded that old hide down. My horse, he knew his business, and he held the road just right. My dog, he's circling round and round as I pull that sticker from her eye. Go on, get back, I'm pulling that sticker from her eye. I noticed she had a tight bag, and her calf was nowhere to be found. I told my dog, if you want something to do, and just like every dog I ever met in my life, he did. Go find your calf, bring him back around. Go find your calf, boy, and bring it back around. Go on, go find it. He darted over the hillside, and he went plumb out of sight. When I looked up, he was bringing back her calf. Put that calf by his mama's side. Oh, put that calf right by his mama's side. Maybe for more than 8 days. So he got himself a belly full of milk, put that calf and his mama on their way. Oh, put that calf and his mama on their way. Just a day in the life of a cowboy, that whole darn world's out spinning round. Me and my dog made a happy reunion when we bedded that old hide down. When we bedded that old hide down.
Happy reunion. Well, I'm just going to do one more for you folks. I thank you for listening, and I thank you for coming to watch this film, this documentary. hope everybody enjoyed it as much as I did. Felt the same way about it as I did when I first saw it, when Amy sent it over to me. I'm gonna do, this is an old cowboy song and one of my favorite cowboy songs, written by Gail I. Gardner from Yavapai County, Arizona. And I recently was out there in Arizona and got to hang out a little bit with Gail's grandson, Gail Steiger, who's a foreman at the Spider Ranch out there. And we got to talking a little bit about a lot of stuff, including this song. And this is a funny song. It always makes me laugh. It's called Sigh Repeats, and sometimes it's also called Tying Knots in the Devil's Tail. See if I can remember all the words. Way high up in the Sigh Repeats, where the yeller pines go tall, Buster Dig and Sandy Bob had a rodeo camp last fall. They're taking their ponies and they're running line, and there may be a dog or two, and the loud they brand every long-eared calf come within their view. Now Elio Dogie, the flop long-eared and didn't bush up by day, had his long-eared whittled and his old hide sizzled in the most artistic way. Then says Buster Jig to Sandy Bob as he towed his sea go down, I'm tired of cow pyrography and or else I'm going to town. So he saddles up and hit some lope, for there weren't no sign of a ride. Them was the days when an old cow punch could oil up his dry insides. When the starts her in the Kentucky bar at the head of the Whiskey Road, and they ends her up at the depot house some 40 drinks below. And the winds are up and the turns around and it goes her the other way. I tell you the Lord's forsaken truth, them boys got stewed that day. Heading back to camp and packing a pretty good load. Lou said to meet, but the devil himself come prancing down the road. And the devil he says, cowboy skunks, better go hunt your holes, 'cause I've come up from hell's rim rocks to gather in your souls. Well, Buster Jig said, devil be damned, and I know pretty tight. No devil ever took no old cow punch without one kind of a fight. Builds him a hole in his old throw rope and he swang her straight and true. He lapped it on to the devil's horns and had taken his dallies too. Now Sandy Bob was a re-eyed man when the gut line coiled up neat. He shakes her out and he builds him a loop and he laps the devil's hind feet. They throwed him down on the desert ground while the iron was getting hot. They cropped and swallowed, forked his ears, and they branded him up a lot. They pruned him up, dehorned and saw, tied knots in his tail for a joke, tied off and left him bellering there, necked up to a black goat. So if you're ever up in the Sigh Repeats and you hear one hell of a wail, you'll know it's that devil bellering around about the knots tied in his tail. All right, thanks everybody.